So, the Star Trek film franchise is done. Most of the TV shows were off the air. And the question that was kind of streaming around was, what's next for Star Trek? And for a while, it was just let it lie. You know, I was not, as a fan, you always want more. But I've come to a different place in my old age. And yeah, you always want more, but I've also learned that you also have to be satisfied with what you've had. And I was kind of in the camp of I'm good with Trek kind of where it is. You know, a series of fairly good movies, some very excellent TV shows, you know. And I was fine with maybe it was that time, it was that place, and it was time to leave them there and move on to something else. But that's not what they did. And let's discuss briefly what they did do. Now, I mentioned at the very beginning of these reviews that I was going to look at the original timeline for the Star Trek Cinematic Universe, and I was not going to review the three, whatever they're called, the J.J. Abrams universe Star Trek movies. The simple explanation for that is I do not like them. I am not a fan of them. I would go so far to say I hate them. I think they are terrible movies. Terrible, disposable, pointless films that, to me, felt like nothing more than J.J. Abrams' audition reel to direct the new Star Wars films. Now, I know Star Trek fans who have been fans of it longer than I have, who are very big fans of the J.J. Abrams films, and that's fine and dandy. But for me, my simple answer are, those are not Star Trek. Let me explain a little bit of what I mean in just a little bit more detail. First of all, as I've said many times, I am generally opposed to reboots, reimaginings, things of that nature. I feel that most of the time what the people are doing, the studios are doing, are simply trying to cash in on name recognition and nostalgia, and normally totally miss the point of what the films or series or whatever was about in the first place. They don't care about that. They just want to make it, you know, big and bad and, you know, and easily accessible. That was one of the other things. And I can understand that from a marketing point of view. You have a property with name value, you want to cash in on it. And going, well, let's go back to the original series and reboot it. The other thing I have a problem with in terms of reboots is that a lot of times I have the feeling, and this could be just a persecution complex on my end, that they are less about let's see what a new director and a new generation can do with this material, as much as it is trying to say that the original was somehow flawed and needs to be fixed. And in all these cases, this was exactly the feeling I got with the Star Trek reboots. The studio just was trying to cash in. They did not care about the franchise or about why it was so beloved. And they decided, all that stuff about the human condition, all that stuff about, bigger ideas, Star Trek being big idea, science fiction, all that out the window, make Fast and Furious in space. Now, let me be clear here. If you wanted to make the Fast and the Furious in space, I don't have a problem with that. Guardians of the Galaxy could be argued to be basically Fast and the Furious in space. And those movies are awesome. But even the Guardians of the Galaxy movies had more story about the human condition and about family and parenting and relationships. It had more to say than any of these Star Trek reboots. So if you want to think of it this way, Guardians of the Galaxy is a better Star Trek movie than fucking Star Trek. They also got a director who I think is a lot of flash and no substance. He tries to convince you that there is substance in what he does, but when you really look at it, there's not. And he did not understand, and he did not care to understand Star Trek. Matter of fact, and this I was soured to these movies going in, because I'd read an article with him in Empire magazine, I believe it was, where he flat out said Gene Roddenberry didn't understand Star Trek. It takes a special kind of balls to say that the person who created the second, and in some cases some would say the first, but one of the most beloved, long-running space operas, multifaceted universes in fiction history, didn't know what he was doing. He didn't understand his own creation. And from that moment on, it was like, J.J. Abrams, fuck you. And to me, that is exactly what those movies bore out. They were a lot of flash, a lot of bang, and absolutely no substance to them. They were trying to make Star Trek a mass appeal thing, which, again, I understand that from a production point of view. You're spending all this money, you want to make a lot of money back, so you want to make it, appeal to the most people. I get that. I understand that. That is what the Marvel films have made a small fortune. Not a small fortune, they've made a fucking Scrooge McDuck fortune doing. But here's the thing with Star Trek. It has always been a niche audience. A big, passionate niche, but a niche audience. It's a lot like pro wrestling, which was also huge in the 90s and then tapered off, because it's always going to be a niche audience. It's not going to be a thing that appeals to everybody. The NFL, the WWE, AEW, TNA, they are never going to be the NFL. And Star Trek, for all of its name recognition, is not going to be Star Wars, which has a mass appeal. Star Trek was always the thinking person's sci-fi. And I remember thinking, watching it, that they have taken the thing that I love, something that spoke to me on an intellectual level, and dumbed it down so it appealed to the assholes who made fun of me for wearing my comm badge on my Letterman jacket. They destroyed the thing I love to make it accessible to the people who mocked the thing I love. And I took and still take great exception to that. Coupled with the fact that none of the movies are very good. In some cases they're wretched, and at best they're not offensive but completely forgettable. The third one, which I think was Beyond, I think Star Trek Beyond was the name of it, was decent. It was the best of the three, but I have honestly been trying for the last 3 days. I cannot remember hardly any of that fucking movie. They were exactly what the early 2000s, or the mid 2000s kind of were in terms of filmmaking. Quick, disposable, forgettable features. Bland, tasteless things that become dated the minute they're out the theater, and that people forget about until they see the trailer for the next one. So, as of this recording, they have kind of left those in the dumpster. They have gone back to the original timeline, which I'm very grateful for. However, the aesthetic choices of J.J. Abrams still haunt the franchise like a fucking ghost. The goddamn lens flares on everything are just so fucking irritating. So, with that being said, so that's my basic opinion on the J.J. Abrams films. So, the last thing to kind of touch on is, where does the Star Trek universe, in terms of the motion picture industry, where does it go now? Where do I think it should go now? The last few years, Star Trek has been enjoying something of a resurgence. Streaming services have made it possible for people to see all of the series from start to finish. They've been rerun like endlessly on the BBC America for some fucking reason. And with CBS's streaming service, they've introduced new Trek shows, which have been met with a lot of fanfare. Discovery, which has a mixed critical reaction, is still fairly well received, and I think has its good points. Same with Star Trek Picard. And they have just announced that they're going to be doing another new series on CBS All Access, starring the new Captain Pike, being a prequel to the original series. So Star Trek is getting a new fan base, and the old fan base is getting back into it. So with that knowledge, where then do I think, if they wanted to go back to the movies, what do I think they should be looking at? Well, I think there are a couple avenues you could go down. While I am happy to see Star Trek back, and I think that the products that they have put out there have generally, I should say, been good, I think there is one flaw amongst all of them. Star Trek has been looking to the past for far too long, well over a decade. When you consider that Enterprise, someone with a really small penis, did you hear that? Oh, must be like a baby carrot. Anyway, sorry about that. Enterprise was a prequel series. The J.J. Abrams films were reboots. Discovery is another prequel series. Star Trek Picard, while it does move the story forward in time, it is still very much peppered with its nostalgia. Here's Picard back, here's Data back, here's Troy, here's Riker, here's Seven of Nine. So it's very much based in nostalgia. And this new series that they're going to be bringing up, which again I'm very excited for, is another prequel series. We haven't moved the timeline forward. And Star Trek, one of the great things about it, and this is another reason I had a problem with the reboots, is Star Trek for over 20 some years had never gone back and said, oh, we're not going to do that. That didn't happen. They've never taken a mulligan. They've always said, no, we're going to move the story forward. We're going to see what, the Next Generation was very much a reflection of late 80s, early 90s. DS9, very much late 90s, sensibilities and whatnot. I feel what needs to happen is Trek needs to move forward. The world is a very different place now than the last time we had a new Star Trek. And especially in this last year, it is an incredibly different world. And Picard gave us a window into what the Star Trek equivalent of that future looks like. And I think we need to explore that a little bit, and we need to explore it with a new crew. We need a new set of faces to take us to new world. So I think what I would do, if I was in charge of Paramount, is I'd do a new set of movies still set in the original timeline, but taking place, within the 20-some years since the last one went off the air, keeping it with the Picard timeline. And give us a whole new crew. Set it on, a brand new ship. It doesn't have to be the Enterprise. It can be, you can name it anything you want, but give us a new crew with new adventures and new commentary on the world as it is now. And if it doesn't catch on, well, you do one movie and there you go. You're done. But maybe it does and you get a couple sequels out of it. Another thing I think they could use the movies to explore are those areas of the Federation and the Star Trek universe that we haven't really gotten a good look at, or we haven't spent a lot of time in. For instance, around the time DS9 was getting ready to wrap up and Voyager was a couple years from wrapping itself up, speculation began about what was going to be the next Star Trek series. They knew they were going to do another one, and they're like, what is this one going to be about? And the fans, there were some things they were really rabid about. Fans have wanted to see a show set on a Klingon ship for years. They wanted to see Star Trek Klingon. DS9 did a couple episodes to kind of placate them, but they wanted a full series, but the producers and all that said, no, that's not enough to maintain an entire, optimistically 7-season, 22 episode a season run. Well, maybe that's enough to fill out a 2-hour movie. You know what else fans were always clamoring about? They wanted to see a Star Trek series based on Starfleet Academy. What was Starfleet Academy like? We'd heard about it, we'd seen snippets, but we'd never actually, done anything with it. And I remember this very clearly. One of the producers in a magazine said, I can't remember the magazine, it was just some sci-fi magazine at the time, said, we're not going to do that because nobody wants to see a series about a bunch of kids going to some fantastic school. Now here's the ironic thing, and some of you have already guessed it. That article was, I think, 2 years after Harry Potter had premiered and become the biggest fucking thing on the planet. So okay, you don't want to do an entire series about Starfleet Academy. What about a movie? Give us a movie that explores that aspect of the Star Trek mythos. Take us to, the medical corps. What does Star Trek MASH look like? What are some of these unexplored parts of this vast universe? We've only seen it through a few very specific perspectives. Again, sorry to be a broken record, but one of the reasons I think Deep Space Nine was such a success is that we saw that universe through not just the Federation perspective. You saw it through the Bajoran perspective, the Ferengi perspective, Klingon perspective, Cardassian perspective, Dominion perspective. You saw it through the perspective of people on Earth who didn't care about Starfleet, who weren't in it, because they always make it sound like everybody on Earth is in Starfleet, and that's not true. So, the movies may be a great place to do kind of these one-shot films and, explore some of this untapped potential. Let's stop going back and trying to mooch off the popularity of the past. Let's build off that popularity and use it as an opportunity to explore things and elements and stories that haven't been done. There are brilliant new sci-fi writers and directors coming up. Let's give some of those folks the reins and see what they come up with. Tell me the fucking truth right now, folks. If Guillermo del Toro was signed to direct a Star Trek movie, wouldn't that be the most fucking awesome thing ever? If Ryan Coogler of Black Panther and Creed fame, I would love to see his take on the Star Trek universe. I would love that. Like, deep down in my soul, I would love to see that. There are creative voices out there who I think could do some really interesting things with this franchise. And again, you do them as a one-shot movie. If it doesn't work, you move on to the next thing. But maybe it does, and maybe you get 3, 4, 5 sequels out of it if you're lucky. But I think, as with all things, you must move forward. I think just going back in time and doing more prequels is fine, but I think at some point we got to take a hard look at ourselves and the era in which we live and reflect on it. And that is what Star Trek has always been the best at. And I think most people would agree, especially given the events of the last few weeks, as I've commented on already. I think we could use a good hard look at ourselves. So, wouldn't it be great to have Star Trek do that for us all again? So, those are my ideas. I'm sure that the bigwigs over at Paramount and CBS watch this show I'm sure they're one of those 3 views I get. So if they are, you don't have to pay me for any of those great ideas. Just take them and make a good movie. That's bullshit. Pay me. But anyway, that is, at least for now, the final word I have on the Star Trek cinematic universe. So I hope you have enjoyed this retrospective. I hope it's inspired you maybe to go check some of these movies out again, or maybe check them out for the first time if you're a new fan. And if nothing else, it's been fun to revisit some of these great films from my past with a new critical eye. So yeah, so I hope you've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it a lot. The series will continue. There are a lot of film series I want to look at. And until next time, drive safe, and I will see you at the movies, and live long and prosper. Make it so.